This is the best interview I ever had, and I'm Mark Rako. Thanks for listening. So, what kind of people and conversations can you expect on this podcast? Well, as we prepare for the podcast's official launch, I've been sharing a few special moments from a few of the really amazing interviews I've been fortunate to have over the last 10 years. Here's one of them. Eric Alper is a Canadian freelance music publicist, Sirius XM host, and much more. He's also a self-proclaimed shameless idealist, and he's funny, with a loyal fan base on Twitter. In my 2020 interview with Eric, he was approachable, fun and funny, and wonderfully insightful and wise. He talked about how he got excited about the music business, how talent keeps it fresh when they have the same questions again and again, and how humor intersects with the work he does. And his answers? Well, he crushed it. I gotta know, what got you excited about the music industry? I mean, would anyone still get you starstruck?
There's a lot of moments. I think probably, the first one when I knew that this was going to be really interesting was hanging out with Jerry Lee Lewis, because Jerry Lee was the first, Great Balls of Fire was the first song that I ever bought with my own money on a 45 in the 70s. And when I was 8 years old, I saw a movie called American Hot Wax, and it told the story of Alan Freed, the Cleveland DJ that coined the term rock and roll. And on stage, or in the movie, there were Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis performed live, and it was really them. Watching that movie by myself as an 8-year-old in a theater up at the cottage was, to me, just that moment where everything clicked, that I said, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to even begin to do something like this, but I want to do this. And I realized that I have no musical talent whatsoever, and I still don't. But when I got to see that movie, and I left the theater like I had just seen Star Wars and going to become a lifelong sci-fi fan. When I got to work with Jerry Lee Lewis for the Last Man Standing album, I was emotionally cool, but he could have touched me in the chest and I would have bowled over because my knees were buckling. And when he called me killer, I thought that might have been the greatest moment and I could die, and that was it. Until I realized that he calls everybody killer. He performed on stage that night. It was a tribute to him being in the music industry for 50 years. It was at the Peabody Hotel in Nashville. And on stage, there was bodyguards with guns by their side. And I wasn't sure if it was to protect the audience from Jerry or Jerry from the audience. And it was the most dangerous 2 hours I've ever spent because he was a killer. I mean, he was one of the most dangerous, vibrant, exciting performers on the planet. So watching him, I mean, there's people I've never met that I've always wanted to say hi to and say, oh, wow, I just want to say thank you, knowing full well that I'm the millionth person to say that to. But some of the greatest people that I would want to meet, I have absolutely no idea what to say. I love Phil Collins. I know more about Phil Collins than probably Phil Collins does, but I would have no idea if I got 18 minutes with him for my show, what on earth to ask him, because I would be too freaked out that this is Phil Collins.
How do you look at humor as playing a role in what you do? Is it just something that naturally kind of leaks out of you because that's who you are and what you do? Or is that something you deploy, let's say, in your work as a satellite radio host, as a publicist, as a journalist? Where does that come from?
I grew up watching Monty Python and all the WNED shows from Buffalo, and whether it was Fawlty Towers or that, or watching David Letterman, and they all seem to have one thing in common, is the twist at the end of their sentence that made everything funny, and that they can take a humorous thing. I love my job. I love my life. I don't want to do anything else. So by nature, I'm an optimist person anyway. And sometimes, when you think that you are the most important person doing the most important job, it's so easy to get yourself wrapped up in everybody else's, problems and situations. But I've had a really great life, and my family who comes from the bar scene and stuff, we all had a really good time doing what we're doing. So humor comes from being on a little bit on your own island. I worked by myself here in the home. When I was working for the record labels, I was the only one doing PR. So all these things would ever go swimming around in my head, but I had nobody to tell it to except for when I got on Twitter. So that's really what it was. But it was just a fascination with comedy in general, or Saturday Night Live, where just that twist of maybe saying something that you would never say out loud, but because you laugh at the end of it, it makes it all good without being rude.
Oh gosh, I love that. What are your thoughts? How do talent keep it fresh when they are in front of crowds over and over again, even with autograph signings or speaking to big crowds, or kind of keeping it fresh? It really must be tough.
No, I think that there's little games that musicians play, especially when you're in a band. You'll give a little bit of a side eye to somebody. You'll smile just a little bit, and it's kind of your job to come up with an answer that makes it sound like this is the first time that you're saying it. That it's an intelligent question. I'm working with Kathy Valentine of the Go-Go's, and in her book, she talks about how the question in every interview was, so what's it like being in an all-girl group? And, I know that the media has to ask that, but at the time, they kept on kind of giving the impression that this might have been the first time to hear about it. But the media knows that they need to ask that question. They know that David Gilmour is always going to be asked about a Pink Floyd reunion. You interview Paul McCartney, you have 7 minutes, 30 seconds of it is going to be, so do you think that the Beatles would have ever gotten back together again if John Lennon wasn't shot and killed? So it's your job to kind of make everything fresh and cool, because if not, then you just become arrogant.
I'll be back soon with another memorable interview moment. Please be sure and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere you find your very best podcasts, so you hear every moment. And you can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Best Interview Pod, and on Twitter at Listen Subscribe. Thanks so much for joining me, and see you soon.